Hello my friends and welcome to the Expensive Coins History channel. Check your coin collection right now, because these rare coins could change everything. Some of the most valuable treasures in the world are not locked inside bank vaults, hidden in museums, or buried beneath the ocean waiting for divers to discover them. Sometimes they are sitting quietly inside a small jar on a kitchen shelf, tucked away in an old coffee tin in the garage, or forgotten in a drawer where loose change collects over the years. Millions of people pass coins through their hands every single day without ever imagining that one of those ordinary-looking pieces of metal could hold an extraordinary story and an astonishing value. That is the strange and fascinating world of coin collecting. It is a world where history, rarity, and the smallest details can turn a 5-cent coin into something worth tens of thousands of dollars. And today we are going to talk about a group of coins that many Americans have seen thousands of times, but almost nobody looks at closely anymore. The Jefferson nickel. For decades, Jefferson nickels have been part of everyday American life. They paid for bus rides, vending machine snacks, parking meters, and morning coffee. They moved from hand to hand so frequently that people stopped paying attention to them. But collectors know something that the average person does not. Within the millions and millions of Jefferson nickels that were produced across decades, there are certain years and certain mint combinations that stand out for very specific reasons. Sometimes the metal was struck slightly differently. Sometimes a small production anomaly occurred at the mint. Sometimes fewer examples survived in exceptional condition than anyone expected. And sometimes a coin that once seemed completely ordinary becomes rare simply because time passes and most of them disappear from circulation forever. That is how a simple 5-cent coin can become a serious collector's prize. There is a particular type of collector who spends years studying these coins. They examine the surfaces under magnification. They look carefully at the sharpness of the design. They compare mint marks, strike quality, and preservation. They know that two coins made in the same year can have dramatically different values depending on their condition and subtle details that most people never notice. Now imagine someone going through an old jar of coins that has been sitting untouched for 20 or 30 years. Imagine the moment when they begin flipping through those nickels one by one. Most will be common. Most will have scratches and wear from decades of circulation. But every once in a while, there is a moment when the date catches the eye. The mint mark looks promising. The surface still has that original mint luster. That is when the heart rate goes up. Because collectors understand that certain Jefferson nickels in exceptional condition can command astonishing prices in the collector market. These are not theoretical numbers or exaggerated claims. These are the types of valuations that appear when rarity meets demand and when a coin survives in a state that very few others manage to reach. And the first coin we are going to talk about today is a year that many people remember seeing countless times, but almost nobody realized that a small number of these nickels would eventually stand apart from the rest. The year is 1982. America in the early 1980s was a place of dramatic change. The country was moving through economic adjustments, technology was beginning to reshape daily life, and the coins produced by the United States Mint continued to flow into circulation by the millions. Among them were Jefferson nickels struck at the Philadelphia Mint. The Philadelphia Mint has a long and important place in American coin history. For many decades it produced coins without mint marks, but by the time the 1980s arrived, the letter P had begun appearing on certain coins, marking their origin in the historic mint facility where generations of American currency had been produced in 1982. Millions of Jefferson nickels were struck for circulation. They entered banks, grocery stores, gas stations, and cash registers across the country. For the average person, they were simply 5 cents. Nothing more, nothing less. But coin collectors know that the story of a coin does not end the moment it leaves the mint. Once coins enter circulation, their journey begins. Some are used heavily and quickly become worn. Others are lost, damaged, or melted. Only a small percentage survive in the kind of pristine condition that collectors later search for with great determination. And this is where the 1982 P. Jefferson nickel begins to reveal why it has captured the attention of serious collectors. Most of the 1982 nickels that people encounter today show the signs of decades of use. The details on Jefferson's portrait may appear softer. The steps on Monticello, which are one of the most closely examined features on Jefferson nickels, may be partially worn or indistinct. The surface may carry the small marks and scratches that come from years of contact with other coins. But every so often, a coin emerges that seems almost frozen in time. Its surface still reflects light with that original brilliance that collectors call mint luster. The design appears sharp and well struck. The fine details, including the steps of Monticello on the reverse side, remain clearly defined. When a coin like this appears, collectors take notice immediately. Because coins like that are not common anymore. Over the years, collectors began to realize that high-grade examples of the 1982p Jefferson nickel were far more difficult to find than many people expected. It was not that the coin was rare when it was produced. Millions were made. But survival in exceptional condition is a completely different story. When collectors search for coins, they are not simply searching for the date. They are searching for the best possible version of that coin. The highest grade, the sharpest strike, the most flawless surface. That is what creates the intense competition among collectors when one of these coins appears at auction or enters the marketplace. A coin that spent decades circulating in pockets and vending machines may only be worth its face value today. But a coin from the same year that somehow avoided heavy circulation and preserved its original beauty can enter an entirely different category. This is why collectors often tell newcomers something very important. Never assume a coin is ordinary until you look closely. Because sometimes the difference between a 5-cent coin and a 5-figure collectible is nothing more than preservation, detail, and a bit of historical luck. Imagine someone opening an old coin album that belonged to a relative. The pages are filled with nickels collected decades earlier, when people were more accustomed to saving coins simply because they liked them. Inside that album might be a 1982p Jefferson nickel that has remained untouched for 40 years. The moment a collector examines it carefully, the story begins to unfold. They look at Jefferson's portrait and see crisp detail. They turn the coin over and study Monticello. They check the steps. They examine the fields for marks or imperfections. And slowly, the realization begins to form that this might not be an ordinary coin at all. Because when a 1982p Jefferson nickel survives in extraordinary condition, it can become something truly remarkable in the collector world. And when one of those exceptional examples appears, the value can reach an astonishing level. A top-grade 1982p Jefferson nickel has been known to command a value as high as $56,000. Think about that for a moment. A coin that was originally worth 5 cents. A coin that once moved through ordinary transactions in grocery stores and gas stations. A coin that millions of people handled without a second thought. And yet, under the right circumstances, preserved in the right condition, it becomes a collector's prize worth tens of thousands of dollars. This is why experienced collectors always say the same thing to newcomers. The real treasure hunt is not always in distant places. Sometimes it is in the coins you already have. And that is only the beginning of today's story, because the next Jefferson nickel on our list has a history that is just as fascinating and a collector value that might surprise even seasoned coin enthusiasts. The next coin in this journey through the world of unexpected treasures takes us just 2 years forward, to a time when the United States Mint was continuing its steady production of Jefferson nickels for everyday commerce. By the mid-1980s, the nickel had already become one of the most familiar coins in American pockets. It was the coin that people reached for when feeding a vending machine, the coin dropped into payphones, the coin that rattled in ashtrays of pickup trucks and sat forgotten in desk drawers across the country. In 1984, millions of Jefferson nickels were struck at the Denver Mint. Each one carried the small but significant letter D beside Monticello, quietly marking its place of origin in one of America's most historic mint facilities. The Denver Mint had been producing coins for generations, and its output flowed into circulation across the western and central parts of the United States. To the average person in 1984, these coins were simply part of everyday life. Nobody set them aside with the thought that decades later collectors might examine them under bright lights and magnification. Nobody imagined that certain examples from that year would eventually command prices that could rival the cost of a new car. But collectors understand something that casual observers rarely consider. The story of a coin does not end when it leaves the mint. In many ways, that is where the story truly begins. Once coins enter circulation, their future becomes unpredictable. Some are used heavily and wear down quickly. Others are lost, damaged, or melted over time. And only a very small percentage survive in the kind of near-perfect condition that serious collectors seek. That is exactly what happened with the 1984 D Jefferson nickel. At first glance, there is nothing about this coin that appears unusual. It carries the familiar portrait of Thomas Jefferson on the front, a design that has been part of American coinage since 1938. On the reverse, Monticello stands proudly, its architectural lines representing both American history and the legacy of Jefferson himself. For most people, this design became so common that they stopped seeing it. It was simply another coin passing through their hands. But collectors never stop looking. There is a feature on Jefferson nickels that experienced collectors pay extremely close attention to. It is the set of horizontal lines that form the steps of Monticello. These steps may seem like a small detail, but they play a major role in determining the desirability of a coin. When a Jefferson nickel is struck with exceptional clarity, those steps appear sharp and fully defined. When the strike is weaker or when a coin becomes worn through circulation, those steps lose their definition and begin to blend together. Collectors refer to the sharpest examples as coins with full steps, and achieving that level of detail is surprisingly rare. In 1984, the Denver Mint produced millions of nickels, but only a tiny fraction of them were struck with the kind of precision that preserved every detail of Monticello's steps in extraordinary clarity. Over the years, collectors began to realize that finding a truly exceptional example from this year was much harder than most people expected. Many of the coins entered circulation immediately. They spent years moving from pocket to pocket, machine to machine, gradually accumulating wear. By the time collectors began seriously studying the surviving examples, most of the best coins were already gone from everyday use. This is where the concept of condition becomes everything. Coin collectors use a detailed grading system to evaluate how well a coin has survived the passage of time. At the highest levels of that system, even the smallest marks or imperfections can affect the final grade. Coins that reach the very top of the grading scale are incredibly rare, not because they were rare when they were minted, but because almost none of them managed to remain that perfect. The 1984 D. Jefferson nickel is a perfect example of this phenomenon. Imagine someone rolling open a bankroll of nickels in the mid-1980s. Fresh coins spill out onto the table, bright and untouched. Most of those coins are quickly spent or mixed into circulation. But perhaps one person sets aside a few coins simply because they like the way they look. Maybe they place them in a small envelope or tuck them into a coin album. 30 or 40 years later, that simple act of saving a coin becomes incredibly significant. Because when collectors search for the best surviving examples of the 1984 D. Jefferson nickel, they are searching for coins that look almost exactly as they did on the day they were struck. The surfaces remain smooth and reflective. The design details are sharp. Jefferson's portrait appears crisp, and Monticello stands with its architectural features fully defined. Coins like that are incredibly difficult to find today, and when one appears, collectors compete intensely to acquire it. This competition is what drives the dramatic difference between an ordinary coin and a truly valuable one. The average circulated 1984 D nickel might only be worth a few cents. But an exceptional example, preserved in top condition with remarkable detail, can enter a completely different league. Collectors understand that coins like this represent a combination of rarity, preservation, and historical connection. They are not simply pieces of metal. They are survivors of time. Think about how many nickels were spent on soda machines, parking meters, and convenience store purchases over the past 40 years. Think about how many were scratched, dropped, or lost. The number of coins that avoided all of that and remained in near-perfect condition is incredibly small. That is why collectors react immediately when one appears. A beautifully preserved 1984 D. Jefferson nickel with extraordinary detail can command astonishing attention in the collector market. Experts study the surfaces, confirm the quality of the strike, and evaluate every detail before assigning it a grade. When that grade reaches the very highest levels, the value can surprise even experienced collectors. Because the market has shown that a top-grade example of the 1984 D. Jefferson nickel can reach a value of around $52,000. It is a number that sounds almost unbelievable when you remember that the coin itself was originally worth just 5 cents. But this is exactly what makes coin collecting such a fascinating world. Hidden among billions of ordinary coins are a handful of survivors that managed to escape heavy circulation and preserve their original beauty. These coins become time capsules, tiny metallic witnesses to the era in which they were created. And sometimes they remain hidden for decades before someone finally takes a closer look. Imagine someone sitting at a table late in the evening, sorting through a pile of old coins that have been collected over many years. One by one, the nickels pass beneath a small lamp. Most are common. Most show the expected signs of age. Then a coin appears that looks just a little bit different. The surface shines brighter. The details are sharper. The steps of Monticello appear crisp and complete. At that moment, the possibility emerges that this coin might not be ordinary at all. Moments like that are what keep collectors searching. Because every once in a while, a coin appears that reminds everyone how unpredictable and exciting this hobby can be. And the story does not end here. The next Jefferson nickel on our list comes from a year that many collectors remember for an entirely different reason, and yet it produced coins that today stand among the most intriguing modern nickels ever studied. By the time the calendar turned to 1983, something unusual was happening in the world of American coins. It was not the design of the coins themselves that had changed, and it was not the denomination. The Jefferson nickel continued to look exactly the way it had for decades, carrying the calm portrait of Thomas Jefferson on the front and the familiar structure of Monticello on the reverse. But behind the scenes, something important had shifted that would later capture the attention of collectors. During the early 1980s, coin collecting experienced an interesting transition. In previous decades, many Americans casually saved coins. They placed them in albums, jars, and envelopes simply because they liked them or believed they might be useful someday. But by the early 1980s, fewer people were carefully saving rolls of brand new coins the way collectors had in earlier generations. That small cultural shift had an unexpected consequence. Coins that entered circulation during this period often circulated heavily before collectors seriously examined them. That meant fewer pristine examples survived in the condition that collectors prized the most. When collectors later began searching for top-quality examples, they discovered that the number of truly exceptional coins from certain years was much smaller than anyone originally assumed. One of the coins that perfectly illustrates this phenomenon is the 1983 D Jefferson nickel, IN 1983. The Denver Mint produced millions of Jefferson nickels to keep up with the demand of everyday commerce. These coins traveled across the country through banks, grocery stores, restaurants, and gas stations. They were used without a second thought, just another 5-cent coin doing its quiet job in the background of daily life. But collectors eventually realized that finding a perfect survivor from this year was surprisingly difficult. Most 1983 D nickels that appear today show clear signs of circulation. Their surfaces have small marks from decades of contact with other coins. The luster that once covered the metal has faded. The delicate details of the design have softened over time. But every once in a while, a coin appears that looks almost untouched. These coins are the ones that make collectors stop and pay attention. A truly exceptional 1983 D Jefferson nickel reveals details that are often missing from the average example. Jefferson's portrait appears crisp and well-defined. The fields of the coin remain smooth and reflective. When the coin is turned under a light, the surface flashes with the same brilliance it had when it left the mint. Then collectors turn the coin over and study Monticello. This is where the most important examination begins. The steps of Monticello, those narrow horizontal lines beneath the building's entrance, tell a detailed story about the coin's strike quality. When the strike is strong and the coin has not been worn down by circulation, each step can appear clearly separated and sharply defined. Collectors spend years searching for examples that display this level of detail. But with the 1983 D Jefferson nickel, those examples are remarkably difficult to find. Part of the reason lies in how coins were handled during that era. Many coins entered circulation immediately after leaving the mint. Few people were storing rolls of them in protective environments, and the coins quickly began their long journey through pockets, registers, and vending machines. Over the decades, the number of surviving coins with truly pristine surfaces shrank dramatically. And that is where the collector market begins to change. When collectors realize that a certain coin in exceptional condition is far scarcer than expected, demand begins to rise. Experts start searching more carefully. Auction houses pay closer attention when one appears. Professional grading services examine them with increasing scrutiny. Eventually, a pattern emerges. The number of top-grade examples remains extremely small. Imagine a collector spending years attending coin shows, examining dealer inventories, and studying auction listings. They are searching for the finest possible example of the 1983 D Jefferson nickel. Dozens of coins pass through their hands, but none quite reach the standard they are hoping for. Then finally one appears. The coin looks almost untouched by time. The surface still glows with original luster. The strike is sharp, the design is clear, and Monticello steps appear beautifully defined. At that moment, the coin becomes more than just another nickel. It becomes a prize. Collectors recognize immediately that opportunities to acquire coins like this are rare. When one appears in the marketplace, interest builds quickly. Experts examine photographs, grading services confirm the coin's condition, and serious buyers begin preparing to compete for ownership. This is where the quiet world of coin collecting becomes surprisingly intense. Because when a coin reaches the highest levels of preservation, it may represent one of the finest examples known. And collectors who specialize in Jefferson nickels understand that coins like this may not appear again for years. That scarcity drives the final stage of the story. When a top-quality 1983 Jefferson nickel appears in the collector market, its value can rise dramatically beyond what most people ever expect from a 5-cent coin in extraordinary condition. Examples of this coin have reached values around $53,000. That number alone is enough to make many people pause and think about the coins they have sitting at home. Because the difference between an ordinary nickel and one worth tens of thousands of dollars often comes down to a combination of preservation, rarity, and the sharpness of the original strike. Think about how many nickels have passed through your hands over the years. Think about the jars of loose change that accumulate in kitchens, garages, and desk drawers across the country. Inside those piles of ordinary coins, there is always the possibility that one survivor from decades ago has quietly preserved its original beauty. That possibility is what keeps collectors searching. They look at every date. They examine every mint mark. They study every detail of Monticello's steps. Because sometimes, hidden among the most ordinary coins in circulation, there is a piece that stands apart from the rest. And the story continues. The next Jefferson nickel on our list comes from a year when the United States Mint was producing coins during a time of economic growth and technological change. Yet even in that period of stability, a small number of coins emerged that would later surprise collectors with their rarity and value. By the time the late 1980s arrived, the Jefferson nickel had already spent half a century as a quiet but constant part of American life. Generations had grown up with this coin passing through their hands without a second thought. It paid for candy at corner stores, dropped into jukeboxes that filled diners with music, and sat in glass jars on kitchen counters across the country. Yet within the massive number of nickels produced every year, a few coins always managed to separate themselves from the ordinary. The year 1988 may not sound like a particularly dramatic moment in American coin history. There was no major redesign of the nickel that year, no radical change in metal composition, and no announcement that collectors rushed to celebrate. The Jefferson nickel continued its steady production, and millions of them flowed from the presses of the United States Mint. Among those coins were the 1988 Jefferson nickels struck at the Philadelphia Mint. Philadelphia has always held a special place in the history of American coinage. It was the nation's first mint and the place where generations of coins were produced for circulation throughout the country. By the 1980s, the mint had modernized its equipment, but the fundamental process remained the same. Blank pieces of metal were fed into powerful presses where designs were struck with immense pressure, leaving behind the familiar portrait of Thomas Jefferson and the image of his historic home, Monticello. When the coins left the mint, they were bright, sharp, and identical to millions of others. At least that is how it appeared at first glance. But collectors understand something that most people never consider. Even when coins are produced in enormous numbers, subtle differences in strike quality and preservation can create rare survivors decades later. The 1988 P. Jefferson nickel is one of those coins whose story unfolded slowly over time. When these coins first entered circulation, nobody paid much attention to them. They were used exactly as intended. They traveled through banks, vending machines, gas stations, restaurants, and convenience stores. Over the years, they accumulated the small marks and scratches that come with everyday use. Most of them eventually became worn enough that collectors would never consider them exceptional. But every once in a while, a coin escaped that fate. Imagine a roll of freshly minted nickels leaving a bank in 1988. A collector or even an ordinary person might open the roll and notice how bright and clean the coins looked. Perhaps they decided to save a few of them. Maybe they placed them in a small envelope, a coin tube, or an album. At that moment, they probably did not imagine that this simple act of saving a coin could eventually turn it into something extremely valuable. But time has a strange way of changing the story of everyday objects. Over the following decades, the vast majority of 1988 nickels circulated heavily. Their surfaces became dull from use. the details of the design softened. The steps of Monticello gradually blended together from wear and repeated contact with other coins. Collectors searching for high-grade examples soon discovered something surprising. Finding a truly pristine 1988 P. Jefferson nickel was not nearly as easy as expected. Coins that still possessed their original luster, sharp strike, and nearly flawless surfaces were incredibly scarce. Many collectors examined thousands of nickels before encountering one that truly stood out. And as collectors know, rarity is only part of the equation. Condition is what transforms rarity into value. Professional coin grading services examine coins under powerful lighting and magnification. They look for every tiny detail that reveals how well a coin has survived. A coin that appears perfect to the naked eye might still have microscopic marks that reduce its grade. Only the finest examples reach the very top of the grading scale. When a coin reaches that elite level, collectors take immediate notice. This is exactly what began happening with the finest surviving examples of the 1988 P. Jefferson nickel. Experts studying these coins realized that only a very small number displayed the level of sharpness and preservation that collectors desire most. Jefferson's portrait appeared crisp and fully detailed. The coin's fields remained smooth and reflective. Most importantly, the architectural features of Monticello on the reverse side were struck with remarkable clarity. Those steps beneath Monticello once again became the focus of intense examination. Collectors carefully counted each visible line, looking for examples where the steps were fully defined and uninterrupted. Achieving that level of clarity was incredibly rare, especially after decades of circulation had worn most coins down. When a coin appeared that combined a strong strike, nearly flawless surfaces, and clear Monticello steps, the collector community paid attention immediately. These were the coins that represented the absolute best survivors from the year, and when one of them appeared on the market, collectors were prepared to compete for it. Imagine a coin that once sat unnoticed in a roll of change suddenly appearing under the lights of an auction room. Experts examine it carefully. The grading service confirms its exceptional condition. Word spreads among collectors who specialize in Jefferson nickels. Now the bidding begins. Each collector understands that opportunities to acquire coins like this are rare. Years may pass before another example of similar quality appears. For someone building a top-tier collection, missing this opportunity could mean waiting a very long time for another chance. This intense competition pushes the value of the coin higher and higher. And suddenly, the ordinary 5-cent coin that once passed through countless hands has become something extraordinary. Because the finest known examples of the 1988 P. Jefferson nickel have reached values around $46,000. It is the kind of number that makes people reconsider the coins sitting quietly in their homes. A coin that once purchased a small item from a vending machine can now represent a remarkable collector prize if it survived in the right condition. Stories like this are exactly why collectors never stop searching. They know that coins are time travelers. Each one carries the story of when it was made, how it was used, and how it survived the decades that followed. Some coins fade into history through heavy circulation. Others quietly preserve their original beauty and wait to be discovered. And that discovery can happen in the most ordinary places. A small box in the attic, a jar of change on a shelf, a coin album inherited from a relative. Inside any of these places might be a coin that nobody has examined closely in years. That possibility keeps collectors curious. Because sometimes the next coin you examine is not just another nickel. Sometimes it is the kind of coin that collectors dream about finding. And the final coin in today's story comes from the early 1990s, a period when the Jefferson nickel continued its long tradition in American coinage, yet produced a few survivors that would later surprise the entire collector community. As the calendar moved into the early 1990s, the Jefferson nickel was already one of the most familiar coins in American life. For more than 50 years, it had circulated quietly through the country's economy, rarely attracting attention outside the small but passionate community of coin collectors. Most people saw it simply as a 5-cent coin, something to drop into a vending machine or hand across a store counter without a second thought. Yet collectors know that even the most ordinary coins can carry extraordinary stories. The final coin in this journey brings us to the year 1993, a time when the United States Mint was continuing its steady production of circulating coinage. Millions of nickels were struck that year, including those produced at the Denver Mint, each one marked with the small letter D beside the image of Monticello. The moment these coins were produced, They were identical to thousands of others rolling off the same presses. Freshly struck nickels glowed with bright metallic luster, their designs sharp and perfectly defined. They were packed into bags, shipped to banks, and eventually released into circulation where they would begin their long journey through everyday life. From the perspective of the average person in 1993, there was nothing remarkable about these coins. They paid for parking meters, convenience store purchases, and public transportation. They moved through pockets, purses, and cash registers across the country. But every coin has a journey, and every journey changes the coin. As years pass, coins collect the marks of daily use. The once bright surfaces begin to dull. The edges pick up tiny nicks from contact with other coins. The details of the design gradually soften as metal slowly wears away through thousands of small interactions. By the time decades pass, most coins look very different from the way they did on the day they were minted. This is why collectors place such enormous importance on condition. The condition of a coin tells the story of how well it survived the passage of time. A coin that spent years circulating heavily will show that history clearly. But a coin that somehow avoided that fate can look almost untouched, as if it were frozen in the moment it left the mint. Those are the coins collectors search for. The 1993 Jefferson nickel became an interesting case study for collectors over the years. When the coins first appeared, nobody imagined that a few of them would later become extremely desirable examples within the Jefferson nickel series. But as collectors began studying surviving examples, they noticed something important. Most 1993 nickels had been heavily used. The surfaces of the typical coin from that year showed the usual signs of circulation. Jefferson's portrait often appeared worn. The smooth fields of the coin carried small scratches and marks from decades of handling. On the reverse side, the delicate architectural details of Monticello had often faded. And once again, the steps of Monticello became the critical feature. For serious Jefferson nickel collectors, the steps beneath Monticello's entrance are more than just decoration. They are a test of the coin's strike quality and preservation. When a coin is struck with exceptional clarity and remains largely untouched by circulation, each step appears clearly separated and sharply defined. But coins with that level of detail are rare. Very rare. Over the years, collectors searching through rolls of nickels, dealer inventories, and coin show tables discovered that truly exceptional examples of the 1993 Jefferson nickel were extremely difficult to locate. Many coins from that year simply did not retain the sharpness and brilliance that collectors hoped to find. Yet every once in a while, a remarkable survivor would appear. These coins immediately stood out from the rest. Their surfaces still reflected light with the bright luster of freshly struck metal. Jefferson's portrait looked crisp and well-defined, almost as if the coin had just left the mint. When collectors turned the coin over and studied Monticello, they could see details that were rarely preserved in typical examples. Those steps appeared clearly separated, forming a series of fine lines that collectors had spent years hoping to find. When coins like this appeared, the collector community took notice. Professional grading services examined them carefully, evaluating every tiny feature that revealed the coin's condition. Under magnification, experts searched for marks, imperfections, or signs of wear. Only the finest coins passed this intense scrutiny and received the highest possible grades. And when that happened, the market reacted. Collectors who specialize in modern Jefferson nickels understand how rare these top-grade survivors truly are. Many of them spend years assembling collections that represent the very best examples from each year and mint. When a coin appears that may be one of the finest known, competition begins almost immediately. Imagine a coin auction where several serious collectors are watching closely. The coin appears on the screen, its photographs revealing nearly flawless surfaces and extraordinary detail. Experts confirm the grade. Word spreads that this may be one of the best surviving examples of its kind. Suddenly the bidding begins. Each collector knows that opportunities like this do not appear often. Years may pass before another example of equal quality enters the market. Missing this chance could mean waiting indefinitely for another opportunity, so the bids climb higher and higher. And the small nickel that once passed through everyday transactions becomes the focus of intense interest among collectors. Because when a 1993 Jefferson nickel survives in truly exceptional condition, its value can reach remarkable levels. In the collector market, examples of the finest quality have been known to approach values around $38,000. Once again, the story returns to the same astonishing reality. A coin that originally carried a value of 5 cents can, under the right circumstances, become a treasure worth tens of thousands of dollars. When you step back and look at the 5 coins we discussed today, a fascinating pattern emerges. Each coin began its life the same way, struck by the United States Mint and released into circulation as ordinary pocket change. None of them were designed to be rare. None were marketed as collectibles. And yet time changed their story. The 1982 P. Jefferson nickel, capable of reaching around $56,000 in extraordinary condition. The 1984 D. Jefferson nickel, known to reach values near $52,000 for the finest survivors. The 1983 D. Jefferson nickel, which has captured collector attention with values around $53,000 in exceptional grades. The 1988 P. Jefferson nickel, another surprising modern coin capable of approaching $46,000 in remarkable condition. And finally, the 1993 D. Jefferson nickel, whose finest examples have reached values around $38,000. 5 coins, each originally worth 5 cents. Each now capable of representing a remarkable collector treasure under the right conditions. Stories like this remind collectors why the search never truly ends. Because the next valuable coin is not always hidden in a museum or buried in an archaeological site. Sometimes it is sitting quietly in a coin jar, waiting for someone curious enough to take a closer look. That is why experienced collectors always give the same simple advice. Never ignore the coins in your collection. Look at the dates. Check the mint marks. Examine the details carefully. Because the most ordinary coin in your pocket might be carrying a story that nobody around you has noticed yet. And sometimes that story can change everything.